Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Jordan Rutter, Director of Communications for American Bird Conservancy and your host today. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared with you afterward. We'll be putting links in the chat, but in case you missed them, please know that we'll be sending an email to everyone who registered that will contain all the links referenced today, as well as a link to the recording. Automated captions are available for this webinar, and you can turn them on by clicking on the CC icon. Please submit any questions you have during the presentations using the Q&A box. Birds inspire and delight us, and they fill us with wonder. They do so much, from pollination to pest control, but birds are in trouble and they're disappearing fast. American Bird Conservancy is taking bold action for birds across the Americas. We work with diverse partners throughout the Western Hemisphere to prevent imminent bird extinctions, improve millions of acres of habitat with bird-friendly management practices, and advocate for and create solutions to urgent threats that put birds at risk. And thanks to support from generous people like you, we're achieving lasting results for the bird species most in need, while also benefiting human communities, biodiversity, and the planet's fragile climate. Thank you for being here to help birds across the Americas thrive. And American Bird Conservancy is taking bold action for birds in 2025, and we need your help. Monthly donors are vital to ABC and bird conservation, powering critical conservation efforts, making new projects a reality, and enabling swift responses to unexpected challenges and new opportunities. And this consistent support protects birds and their habitats throughout the year. Will you resolve to support bird conservation by becoming a monthly donor today? With a monthly gift of $10 or more, you'll receive our brand new Bold for Birds t-shirt to wear proudly all year long as a symbol of your dedication to bird conservation. Also, thanks to a generous ABC supporter, all new monthly donors will have their first 12 monthly gifts count toward a one-to-one match, which could mean up to $20,000 for bird conservation. You can make a gift now by visiting abcbirds.org/give or by scanning the code on your screen with your phone. Thank you so much for caring about birds, and a special thank you to all the ABC members and supporters in the audience right now. You're making a difference for wild birds and their habitats every day. I forgot to say happy 2025. Can you believe it? I have to admit that I have yet to successfully write 25 when jotting the date down for any reason, so I'm not sure I do believe the new year is here. But what I do know is that American Bird Conservancy is entering the new year dedicated to taking bold action for birds with your help. And a new presidential administration and Congress presents opportunities and challenges to enact laws and regulations which support bird conservation. While birds don't observe political boundaries, government entities have a significant impact on bird populations through lawmaking, oversight, and fund allocation, and effective bird conservation depends on us working across these lines as well. From local city councils to state and national governments, and even US participation in international legislation, our planet, our climate, and all of the communities that depend upon them need us more than ever. And today you're going to learn about ongoing policy efforts to advance bird conservation, ABC's outlook on navigating the new dynamics of the pending US administration changes, and learn more about the importance of engaging in policy at the federal level, including ways that you can take action for birds all year long. So let's meet today's speakers. First up, we have Annie Chester, and she's ABC's policy director. She advocates for bird-friendly policies at the state and federal levels to support ABC's mission in on-the-ground conservation work. Her focus areas are migratory and seabird conservation, and some of the issues that she has worked on include migratory bird habitat conservation funding, red knot recovery, and plastic pollution mitigation. Robert Perez is ABC's Oaks and Prairies Joint Venture Coordinator. A South Texas native, Robert retired from Texas Parks and Wildlife in 2021 after serving in various roles mostly related to upland game birds. With over 30 years of experience as a wildlife professional, he has led strategic planning and implementation efforts of numerous national, regional, and state conservation initiatives. Last but not least, Steve Holmer is ABC's Vice President of Policy. Steve has over 25 years of experience working to conserve endangered wildlife. He came to ABC from the Wilderness Society and previously served as campaign coordinator of American Lands Alliance, working to conserve habitat for the northern spotted owl and marbled murrelet. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Annie to kick things off with an overview of what's coming up in terms of federal policy realm. Hi, Annie.
Hi, Jordan. Thanks for that intro. I'm just going to pull up my presentation here, so give me 1 second. All right, can you see that?
You're set. Take it away.
Great. Well, thanks everyone again for joining today. I'm really happy to be here. It's a chilly afternoon in DC. So to kick things off, I just want to bring your attention back to this great pyramid you saw earlier. This is ABC's strategic framework, and I bring this up in this policy presentation because, as you can see at the bottom of the ABC pyramid, is building the bird conservation network. I like to emphasize that this is really important for policy work as well, because without a strong bird conservation movement with lots of voices involved in the process, we wouldn't be able to push forward policies that benefit birds. So thank you all for being here. You are what helps build this movement. I will talk a lot about actions you can take, but I also want to emphasize why we should care about U.S. policy and why we should be focused on building the bird conservation movement. So I'm assuming if you're at this webinar this afternoon, you care a lot about U.S. policy, you care a lot about birds, but it's worth emphasizing that birds are impacted by so much, and they're impacted by so many facets of policy, from ocean policy that impacts bycatch to grasslands conservation. The list really goes on. And not only are policies that impact birds, but they're policies that impact you. So policies that are, mitigate pollution, for example, also benefit you and your communities. So really caring about bird conservation is about so much more than just birds. So I know there's a lot of uncertainty in this new year. It is 2025. I can't believe that. And we have a new administration coming in, but I really want to focus attention quickly on good things that happened in 2024 for birds. So we saw several bills that benefit bird conservation reauthorized. We saw the Neotropical Migratory Bird Conservation Act reauthorized. This bill is really critical for getting funding to on-the-ground habitat restoration projects in wintering grounds for migratory birds. So super exciting. We also saw reauthorization of the America's Conservation Enhancement Act, ACE Act. This includes several provisions that benefit birds, including some wetland habitat conservation efforts. We also saw reauthorization of the Coastal Barrier Resources Act, which deals with coastal habitats. So this is all great news for birds. Another exciting thing that happened at the very end of 2024 was passage of the United States Foundation for International Conservation Act. This bill basically creates a new funding source for international conservation. In this new year, we'll see how much funding this bill receives, but birds could be set to benefit greatly from the dollars that this bill brings forward. So really exciting. Stay tuned in this new year to see what happens, how this bill comes to fruition, but we're really excited for it. So I mentioned all these good things that passed, but of course there's things that didn't pass, and there's things we're thinking about in this new year that we would like to see done, or at the very least, we want to see these bills reintroduced. So this is a great long list. It's by no means comprehensive either. There's certainly other bills out there that benefit birds. There's bills that I'm sure will come to fruition in this new year that will benefit birds. But this is a quick snapshot. I want to quickly highlight a couple of these bills just to give you an idea of kind of the breadth of bird conservation policy. So the first bill on the list is the Sustaining America's Fisheries for the Future Act. This bill is a pretty comprehensive bill, but it would really ensure that considerations for climate change are in fisheries management more so than they are currently. It would also increase public transparency in the fisheries management process on the regional level. There's some bycatch improvements in there as well in terms of mitigation efforts. So That's very exciting. A little bit further down the list, we see the Farm Bill. This is something that we thought might get done last year. It didn't end up happening, but it will be revisited in this new year. The Farm Bill is a huge source of conservation funding for bird conservation. So really important to stay tracking that. ABC is very engaged in the Farm Bill process, so stay tuned for what happens there. So I talked about the legislative process a little bit, talked about some of the bills. There is also this other process called appropriations, and this is the way in which Congress allocates federal funding. The appropriations process is quite complicated. I am not going to be able to comprehensively give you the mechanics of that, but hopefully I give you an idea right now of why appropriations is important. So appropriations is funding a variety of federal programs, everything from programs that help human health to defense spending, and then as well bird conservation and just general environmental conservation. Appropriations, because there is so many different programs and things to fund, Congress breaks down into 12 congressional appropriations committees. The committees are the same on the House and the Senate side. These committees deal with topical issues. So for bird conservation, there's a few key committees we look to that really deal with the programs that matter most to birds. I highlighted one of those committees on my slide here, and that's the Interior Committee. They are the committee that works on funding for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Environmental Protection Agency, so really important for bird conservation. And federal appropriations is important for a variety of species of birds and just broadly bird conservation. Up on the screen here, I just wanted to highlight two of the birds that have really benefited from federal appropriations that ABC continues to advocate for. We have the EEV, which is a Hawaiian forest bird, as well as the red knot, which is a migratory shorebird. The Hawaiian forest birds have benefited from a program called State of the Birds. State of the Birds. And then the red knot has benefited from Endangered Species Act funding, as well as some appropriations report language. So there's plenty of other species that really benefit from specific line items and specific programs that are within this big appropriations framework. So I mentioned federal agencies are funded through appropriations. I wanted to share a list of some of the federal agencies that directly are involved in bird conservation. These are agencies that, really need funding to be able to conduct these programs. So, of course, the Fish and Wildlife Service is on there, the EPA, the Department of Agriculture, as well as the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which deals with a lot of seabird issues. So, really want to make sure these agencies have robust funding. And again, these agencies administer a variety of programs. Here, again, is a list of programs. Each of these programs addresses a threat to seabirds. I mentioned Neotropical Migratory Bird Conservation Act. That really helps wintering habitat, restore wintering habitat. We also have programs that are addressing marine debris, which impacts seabirds, marine pollution. The National Seabird Program addresses bycatch and a variety of other seabird issues. State of the Birds helps Hawaiian forest birds. So again, this is not a comprehensive list, but just a snapshot of some of the programs that are really helping birds. So at this point, you're probably wondering, how can I have my voice heard in either the appropriations or legislative process? And really the best way is sending letters to your elected officials or calling them, letting them know what policies matter to you. ABC has a really great space on our website filled with action alerts. I really encourage folks, if you're able to fill out those action alerts, because it lets your members of Congress know or your elected officials know that you care about an issue. encouraging others to act. So letting your friends know about bird conservation, telling them about the policies that impact birds is also a really good way you can help move forward positive policy and get others involved in building that bird conservation movement. Attending a fly-in. So this is an event where you meet with your elected officials, but this can also happen on a state level or a local level. So getting involved just broadly in your local area where you are voicing your concern about policies that impact birds is really important. And especially in this, changing administration, we want to be acting federally and also locally. And locally, you can make a huge difference. So definitely a lot of ways to get involved, not only just in bills you support, but where you're making your voice most heard. So with that, I thank you, and I look forward to answering some questions at the end, but I will turn it back over to Jordan.
Thanks so much, Annie. Yeah, we'll have you come back at the Q&A portion at the end. But next up is Robert, who is going to take all of this paper bills and put it into action in the field. So Robert, if you want to get all set up, I do want to remind folks that this webinar is being recorded and we'll be sharing the link afterwards. But Robert, your presentation looks great.
Okay.
Awesome, I can hear you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, my name's Robert. Yeah, we'll go into bird policy, programs, and practices, kind of where the rubber hits the road. We do at ABC and partners and staff work with all kinds of folks to ensure that federal, state, local policies and programs support bird conservation. And he mentioned the federal farm bill. That's a big one, significant funding. It goes for multi-years and it provides support to farmers and ranchers and managers. And with the change of administration, we're looking forward to the next farm bill being passed and continue to provide the support where it's needed. At the state level, wildlife agencies are charged with the conservation of fish and wildlife, and they also set policy at the state level with public input. At the local scale, there are so many different, just innumerable county, municipalities, water boards, governing bodies that impact how we use natural resources in our communities. And folks can be engaged at all these levels, and our staff and partners are engaged at all of these different levels, ensuring that what hits the ground can have a positive impact for birds. And so with that, the programs, there are so many programs and so little time. Birds definitely need the attention and work. Like I mentioned before, the big USDA farm bill, that houses the Farm Service Agency and also the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And those two entities alone offer just an alphabet soup of so many different programs. We couldn't list them all here, but they offer all those programs to producers and landowners, and some of those can incentivize bird-friendly land management. In particular, an example would be the Farm Service Agency's Conservation Reserve Program, or CRP. You've probably heard of that program. That's a big one. And then NRCS's Environmental Quality Incentive and regional conservation partnership programs. Those have done tremendous amount of work for birds in America. And they offer technical and financial assistance to producers to put the practices on the ground that have those benefits to the birds that we're trying to conserve. Fish and Wildlife Service, they also have some great programs. A good example would be the Partners for Fish and Wildlife, looking at imperiled species. And there are far too many to list in one presentation, but there are so many programs out there at all these different levels, including your state and local authorities. Practices. Let's move on to practice. The old adage, there's a practice for every program and a program for every place. And what this essentially means is that we need to use the appropriate practices in the appropriate places that have an impact. We don't want to spin our wheels and put things on the ground that don't actually help the birds. So it's important to know where things go and how they really result in a positive impact for the birds. There's kind of four major categories of these kind of actions. One is habitat protection. It's where something goes into like an easement. There's restoration. That would be like old croplands that the seed bank has really been depleted and we have to go in there and plant things, those degraded type sites. And then there's enhancement. Habitat enhancement is where most of my staff and our team and across the great Plains biome, a lot of folks are working on enhancement, which is the cow, the plow, and prescribed fire, trying to enhance those habitats on working lands. And then the fourth category is kind of nebulous, a little harder to kind of get your head around, and that's the persistence or retention. And kind of simply put, that's if we're working to incentivize a conservation action on the ground on private lands, when the incentive goes away, what we really want to see is permanent adoption of that practice. Here's some examples that are used across the grassland areas and savannas: brush management, prescribed burning, fire breaks, cross fencing, range planting. So this is a list of different practices. There are many numerous practices, and they change as you go across the states, but here are some that we use, at least in our geography. And I guess the important thing to note is that they're designed to help landowners incorporate those management practices into their operations, and that the outcome is that increases plant diversity, carbon sequestration, mitigates the impacts of climate change, reduces wildfire risk, and ultimately reverse bird losses caused by habitat degradation. All birds don't need the exact same type of habitat. So this graph here are some of the species that were a priority for our area, and the dark green is where they kind of is the area that they use that habitat type. So as you go from left to right, bare ground or very low grasses, and then grasses get taller, native warm seas grasses, then you get woody start to come in, and then you get young forests and so on and so forth. So some birds have a wider range of tolerance and can operate in multiple type of vegetative stages or vegetative structure, and some are very narrow in where they require. And so this is kind of showing you that it's important to hit all the different areas for the different species of birds. Grazing, the cow. We work with producers, landowners to help them implement grazing plans, that they have stocking rates and rotations and periods of rest that really increase the soil health, soil carbon, plant diversity, improve native grasses, water resources, and all those things that we're trying to achieve. In our geography, that really means leaving a minimum average stubble height of 8 inches. And we want that there so that in the future we can go support prescribed burning, those that will ensure that that plant diversity stays intact. And the outcomes from this is that we want folks to, as I mentioned before, it's got to be sustainable. It helps their bottom line, possibly increases it, and then it's permanently adopted. So the plow, woody encroachment. Many open grasslands, prairies, and even savannas, with the absence of fire, with the absence of some things that historically occurred in those areas, they got invaded by woody species, even native woody species, but they changed those habitat types. There's millions and millions of acres that were really invaded by woody species. It's a huge problem to grassland and savanna birds. And so really mechanical, chemical treatments, there are ways that we can go in there and mechanically reduce that woody canopy. And you want to work in areas where you can have the most return on your investment. So that's areas that aren't super invaded. It's lower cost as opposed to areas that are completely invaded and a huge cost trying to go back to square one in that situation. That's a picture of a forestry mulcher in action. Here's another mulcher in Oklahoma in action, removing eastern red cedar, reducing that canopy. And then prescribed fire. No, we're not talking about wildfire here. We're talking about prescription or controlled fires. And the planning and execution of these burning events on private lands can occur with cost incentives through these different programs. And it can also occur without cost incentives, where we just provide technical guidance. And again, the goal here is for folks to adopt that fire return interval. In our areas, it's about every 3 to 4 years. And what that does, it prevents the woody species from encroaching and taking over and displacing that grass, because the historic vegetation in those areas is prairie and savanna. And so after you have an event like a fire, what we see is a flush return immediately, just months after, of lush green vegetation coming back in and being vibrant, and soil, carbon, and everything just really working together to produce that historic dominant vegetation. And I think that's the last of it right there. So look forward to answering some questions at the end of this program. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Robert. We'll have you back at the Q&A, but next up is Steve, who will talk more about those federal policies at large. Welcome, Steve.
Great. Thanks, Jordan. Okay, is that looking all right?
Yep, take it away.
Great, thanks so much. Appreciate you all joining us. So one of the things that we really focus on is recovering birds that are listed under the Endangered Species Act, and we try to carefully track their status and carry out conservation efforts to reverse their decline, recover them, and have them ultimately delisted. And generally speaking, birds are doing very well. The majority of birds that are listed are seeing increasing populations or have already been delisted. And then we have a significant portion that is also a stable population, which we view as a good thing. So overall, about 70% of the listed birds are on the road to recovery. We still do have some in decline, and so we're using this effort to help target our efforts and really focus on those declining species. So a couple of the species that have been recently delisted, the interior least tern pictured here, black-capped vireo, Kirtland's warbler, Hawaiian hawk, San Clemente sage sparrow. So all of these are indications of successful conservation efforts in species that are no longer at risk of extinction. And so every year we're asking Congress to support these recovery efforts. And this includes specific requests to focus on species that we feel like are in most need or in good position for recovery. Hawaiian forest birds, where 12 species are at risk of extinction, is a major focus of these requests, where we're currently asking for 20 million. The marbled murrelet, a threatened and declining species in the Pacific Northwest. The lesser prairie chicken in the middle of the country that was recently listed, and then the red knot, a shorebird on the East Coast. And so all of these are areas where we think that specific, more focused effort can really deliver big results. So when we look particularly at Hawaii, there's three big things going on there. The Birds Not Mosquitoes project, where we're trying to eliminate the invasive mosquitoes that are spreading avian malaria and putting the forest birds at risk. We've also been involved in projects to create predator-proof breeding areas where fences are put in so that shorebirds are going to have safe havens where they can successfully nest. And then there's a lot of collisions issues where birds go out to forage and come in and are affected by lights, whether they be street lights or run into power lines that they can collide into. So there's a lot of collisions work going on in Hawaii as well. And we've been working with a large partnership. Here's some photos of the Mosquito Project, which involves a lot of high-tech wizardry and is in a great discussion unto itself. But it gives an idea that there's a great deal of activity that's going into this conservation. And this has been building for a long time. When the first State of the Birds report came out, we then started advocating for specific funding for Hawaii. And the way we get money for Hawaii is through a line item called the State of the Birds Activities, which is in the Fish and Wildlife Service budget. But then there can also be congressional earmarks where members from Hawaii ask for specific projects to be supported. There was also funding through both the infrastructure bills and the Inflation Reduction Act. And American Bird Conservancy and the Nature Conservancy also made donations to this project. And when we look at how much money has been involved here, when the State of the Birds program first was funded in 2010, it was for 2.5 million. And so we've been consistently asking for more, and that program is now up to 4.75 million a year. And since this has been going on since 2010, the cumulative amount of funding so far has been 47.5 million. And this has been underwriting the Mosquito Project and doing the predator-proof fences and other work going on the island. There was also significant funding out of the Infrastructure and Inflation Reduction Act, about 44 million. And again, most of this went for the Mosquito Project, which has been in operation now for about a year, releasing sterile male mosquitoes into the environment in the hope of crashing the mosquito population and saving the birds that way. So we also do a lot of defense work, making sure that our laws are effective and well implemented. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act has been an issue that has seen some back and forth in recent years, where there's been an effort to establish general take permits to reduce bird mortality from things like communications towers and power lines. And there's also been a great deal of progress about best practices that reduce bird mortality. We actually know how to greatly reduce the threats. from a lot of the things that harm birds. And so it's really a question of trying to get those things implemented that is really a big focus of our effort. So one of the things that we may see is the potential that there could be a rollback of the incidental take authority under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. This is something that has been going on now for a few years as there's been a change of parties. There's sort of been a little back and forth. Our hope is that we can put that to an end. And part of the reason I'm feeling that way is that we did see a new rule this year. The bald and golden eagle take permit rule was put out in February. And I think it offers a new path forward where we can hopefully avoid this back and forth. But we also have some legislative language in the Migratory Bird Protection Act, as well as the possibility of appropriations language that can encourage the agency to fully protect migratory birds. So when we look at the Eagle Rule and specifically what it did, is it puts in place a number of requirements that we think could greatly reduce eagle electrocutions. Right now, a lot of eagles die when their wing tips will touch wires that are too close together. There can also be poles and things that aren't properly insulated that they can get electrocuted if they perch on them. And when these things happen, you can have power outages, you can have fires, and so there's a real need to improve the old infrastructure, both to conserve birds, but also because we need a good electric grid and we need to reduce fire risks. The thing that we liked about the general permit for wind is it really focuses on the areas where we can really do something about it. It identifies the high risk areas where increased efforts to reduce collisions and other efforts around the wind farms can really make a big difference. We are seeing some golden eagle impacts from wind farms in Wyoming, and there is concern about the eastern golden eagle population, which is a distinct population segment that winters in the eastern U.S. and lives up in Canada the rest of the year. And it's separate from the rest of the population, and it does appear to be facing some unique threats that we think that having this wind energy general permit could be helpful for. Another area that we involve ourselves in is Endangered Species Act defense, looking at new rules and legislation. During the first Trump administration, there was a critical habitat exemptions rule that we were part of a coalition that challenged. We also look closely at listing decisions and try to do our very best to make sure that the best science is being applied and that the law is being followed. And I'll just close a quick note about another positive area where we've been seeing some really great progress, which is reducing collisions. There has been legislation, the Federal Bird Safe Buildings Act has been introduced a number of times now and has passed the House before, but we've never gotten it fully through and signed into law. But we're going to continue working on it. And we also have been working the appropriations process and working with the federal agencies on this issue. We have been seeing for the last decade or so language in the annual appropriations bill directing the federal agencies to address this problem at the federal buildings that they manage. And as a result, we've been seeing terrific projects by the National Park Service. The General Service Administration, which kind of oversees all federal buildings, has issued guidance. And so while we have not passed the law, we are making progress. And at the same time, it's notable that there's been quite a few state and local ordinances to reduce window collisions. And so, our hope is to see these efforts continue and get magnified around the country. And there's one of my favorites. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Steve. If these presentations have energized you to join us on the front lines to advocate for birds, while I invite the presenters to join me back on screen, I encourage our audience to join ABC's text message list. If you text BIRDS, B-I-R-D-S, to 1-833-560-2945, that's 1-833-562954, or scan the code on your screen for an easy way to send that same message, you'll join our mobile message action team, and you'll never miss an opportunity to take action on legislation that impacts birds. It's an easy way to stay on the front lines of bird-friendly advocacy and stay connected to ABC. Thanks so much, presenters, for joining me back. I have a ton of questions for you, thanks to our engaged audience members. I'm going to start with Annie, since she started the presentations. And there is a very famous line that says that you should think globally but act locally. And I'd love for you to just dig in a little bit more and help our audience members really think about what they can do at the state and local levels to get involved and how ABC is taking action there.
Yeah, great point, Jordan. There's a lot you can do on the local level. I think the first thing I would say is really just pay attention. Every state government is a little different. Every local government is also different. Learning the processes of how your local government's work is really critical to understanding how legislation is passed and how you can impact the legislative process. Tracking bills is really important, and letting people know about bills that you care about is really important. And as I mentioned earlier, writing letters, calling your elected officials, whether that's on the federal or state level, is incredibly important.
Thanks, Annie. Now, Robert, you shared a ton of really valuable information, especially for those audience members that do have some land and want to get involved. The question, though, that we keep getting is how do people find out if they're eligible and how do they start participating in these programs? Could you share a little bit more about what the next step is for people that want to take action?
Sure. Yeah, for the big one, we talked about the Farm Bill. Every county has a USDA service center in it. So every county in the country, you've got these centers, and you go to that county center where the USDA houses FSA and NRCS. And if you're a landowner, you can go in there and get a property number or a farm number and start that process. And there are certain programs that have adjusted gross income requirements, and there are other programs that do not. And so depending on what type of assistance, at least from the federal sense, that you're looking for, the answer may vary. But that's not the only place to go. There are so many different organizations. So just state level, contact your state wildlife biologist. And the Fish and Wildlife Service, contact your Partners for Wildlife biologists. So most of those things are all online and relatively accessible, but look at where you're living and get online and see what the available programs are in your area. But that would be my best approach.
Thanks so much, Robert. And Steve, we started off this webinar and it's on everyone's mind is the upcoming administration change. And obviously it's really important for ABC to have as many tools in its toolbox to help conserve birds. What tools do you have to navigate politics and what's ahead for birds? Does ABC lobby or do anything else in Congress that you'd like to share?
Sure. Yeah, we do quite a lot in the lobbying sphere. I was up, did a couple meetings this morning, and two of our other team members are in town working on the Farm Bill and on pesticides right now. So we've got quite a lot going on with our advocacy. But where this begins is to research the issues and make sure that we understand what birds need. Sometimes this then requires us to develop alternatives, develop ideas, solutions, which we then carry into the policy arena. And then we do direct lobbying. We go and talk about the bills, the things that are needed, the solutions that we've come up with, whether it's for an appropriations annual spending bill or it's something that we'd like to see in permanent law. And then we will do things to validate that solution. We will do sign-on letters. We will engage scientists. We'll engage economists. We'll engage businesses. We'll find basically all the partners and allies that might, agree with us on this and build that coalition of support. And then we talk to you, to our membership, our supporters, and ask you to reach out to your lawmakers because it's really the voices of constituents that matter the most. It's your senators, your representative that want to hear from you. And so your letters can really make a big difference. We of course send out these templates, and I would encourage folks to personalize them a little bit. Bring them home to your town if you can. Offer a personal experience from something that you've seen to the letter, and that can really add a lot of power to it. And then, of course, if you're interested in going further down that road, making phone calls is a great way to go and actually talk to people, let them know you care about the birds, and talk with them about your experience. And then, of course, we encourage folks to come and lobby with us. People are invited and welcome to come to DC, and we'll be happy to work with you to go around and talk with your lawmakers. But this is also something that you can do locally, where most senators have state offices, and your local representative will probably have a nearby office. And that's a great way to connect with your elected officials as well. And then I'll just quickly mention we have a second organization, the American Bird Conservancy Action Fund. And this is in the 501c4 tax status. This allows us to do political advocacy and actually support the bird champions that are, taking action and leading this effort. We're really focused on thanking our champions in Congress right now. We find that encouragement is really the key thing that we can do to spur action. And we're also trying to find new champions. Building bipartisan support is critical in this current political environment. And so finding Republican leadership for some of our issues is a top priority. And so your support, your letter writing, your donations can really make a big difference in terms of our ability to do this outreach.
Thanks so much, Steve. You shared so much great information. I have a few follow-up questions I'm going to ask all of you to elaborate on. So first off, I'm going to go to you, Annie. I'm an average American. I have a family, a job, limited funds and everything. I can't come to your fly-in, and calling during business hours is hard and everything. But luckily, ABC has these action alerts. If I give you my name, how do I know it's not just going into the void or anything? How impactful are action alerts for folks? Do you
Yeah,
have an example of a recent win or something, maybe?
yeah, well, I'll say two things. So the first thing is Steve mentioned personalizing your letter. So you have this action alert template. If you change it up a little bit, that's really helpful. So what happens is you send an action alert to Congress. They're keeping a tally of all the letters they receive about a certain issue. So for example, ABC runs a variety of alerts, but recently we have had the Migratory Bird Treaty Act alert. A lot of people have sent in that alert and it will be tallied. But if you personalize it, make it look a little bit different, if a specific member of Congress is getting a flood of alerts about a certain issue, they might mark that as like, okay, we know that's an action alert coming from a certain, interest group. But if we get a slightly different message that looks a little different, it kind of amplifies it a little bit differently. Like they will see that as, I want to say though, like even if you don't have the ability to personalize your alert, like you are, you're running to an appointment, you just send the alert quickly. That is very valuable because again, all those tallies, that still is very meaningful. The more people they see, that makes a big difference. And that's also an important thing is like, I think sometimes we can feel like, oh, our letters aren't being read, or I keep having to do this. This is very exhausting. And I totally hear that. And all I can say is that it's really important to still do it because it is the continuous kind of the continuous voices that are going to eventually do something there.
Thanks, Annie. Yeah, it's really important to not take that for granted. Everyone does have a voice for birds, and when we unify, it makes such a difference. It keeps the drumbeat going, for sure. But speaking of individuals, Robert, do you have any stories or highlights of a landowner that you've worked with on these projects that benefit from federal appropriations that, again, help share kind of that rubber hitting the road and the follow through of how important all of this is?
Right. Yeah. No, there's numerous landowners. There's the coffee family in Oklahoma actually participated in a webinar last year. There's some other folks that we've worked with. And I think the take home messages here is that we come and meet with and provide one-on-one kind of technical assistance and planning assistance, and folks work with us to start to take small steps, small actions. Sometimes it might be a small change in the way that they graze, or maybe a small scale controlled burn. And then as time goes on, maybe just a year later, we get the feedback, and the feedback is, I haven't seen a bobwhite quail in my place in 10 years. I started working with your team, and they're back. Or I saw wild turkey, and we hadn't had wild turkey here before. So a lot of times they see it in the wildlife and the response of animals to those actions, and they're elated to share with us that how good they feel about doing that work, that stewardship pays off for their actions. Yeah.
That's incredible. And it must be so rewarding for you, Robert. Steve, I want to come back to you and ask you about current events. Obviously, current events, they influence what people are talking about and what's front of mind. How do current events impact federal policy and the work that you're doing? One of the most bird specific current events right now is avian influenza. Is that impacting federal policy and the work that you're doing at all?
Fortunately, it has not yet. Bird flu is largely an issue around poultry and the raising of chickens. And there has been on a few cases people who had very close contact to infected birds would get the bird flu. And there's always been this worry that this could somehow spread and become this general problem for human health. Fortunately, it has not gotten to that point. And this is an issue where there's like a tremendous amount of focus on this because this has big impact on producers. And so there's a great deal of work by the government tracking bird flu, as well as tracking this transmission problem where the bird flu might get out. And so this is just one where we're closely watching, but so far it's not really been a bird conservation issue.
That's really good to hear. But speaking of individual birds, I want to come back to you, Robert. I am a bird person, and that's what we're all here for. So would you mind sharing a little bit more about the specific species that are declining in the area that you're working in? I just love, if you have any like fun facts or just really enticing projects that are happening in 2025 for those species.
Yeah, of course, Jordan. We've got a recent partnership with the Chickasaw Nation in Oklahoma, a Blue River project in a riparian zone and the uplands around it, where the nation and the East Central University um, programs there at the Oka Institute are focusing on restoring the riparian areas and increasing water into the springs to those communities. And on the upland, ABC and our team are working to reduce the woody encroachment, take out some of the cedar, incorporate more prescribed fire, and the responses will be measured by our staff and also interns and technicians that we hire in the summer months, in the spring and summer, to go in there and monitor and do bird surveys and see what the birds you see before those management actions, during and after. And hopefully we hope to tell a story that these resources, these programs that hit the ground because of good policies, that they're really making an impact on the ground level for these birds.
That's incredible, Robert. I hope folks stay tuned to learn more and get updates on that. But you mentioned working with First Nations and again, the local communities and everything. Annie, I'd love to know if there's any coalition efforts or other partnerships that you really are benefiting from to help advance this policy work in 2025.
Yeah, definitely. Coalitions, getting input from others, other stakeholders, regardless of who that is really critical. I work a lot on seabird issues, so for me, it's important to hear from scientists, coastal communities about the things that seabirds need the most. I certainly work in a variety of coalitions. One example is a coalition on plastic pollution, looking to see kind of what plastic pollution legislation is feasible in this new year, whether that's on the federal or state level, and using kind of the knowledge that various stakeholders from different national nonprofits, regional organizations, and communities bring to the table.
Thanks, Annie. And obviously, it's an incredible partnership and group effort to get a species delisted. Steve, you mentioned several, which are incredible milestones and accomplishments. But what happens to keep those birds off the list and keep them from backsliding? What happens after that delisting? Do we move on to the next species to get it delisted, or do we keep tracking it? Would you mind speaking a little bit more to that?
Sure. Yeah, the process does continue in terms of monitoring the birds and doing 5-year status assessments to make sure that they are continuing to make progress. And so if it did turn out that through some circumstances they were backsliding, that their numbers started to drop again, then it is completely possible that a delisted bird could get relisted again. Our hope is that we get recovery to a point where the birds are not only not at risk of extinction, but actually recovered and fulfilling their niche within the ecosystem. So sometimes that can take further work and ongoing conservation efforts, even after a species has been delisted. The bald eagle pictured there is seeing a population increase. It was delisted in 2007, but it's still facing serious conservation risks and threats that we can solve. It could be doing even better.
Thanks, Steve. Annie, I'm going to come back to you because a question that just came in is how can people best track what bird legislation is happening in their city, state, county, federal legislation? You know, if they want a status update and know where to jump in, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a few things. I'll just plug an ABC resource first. So we have a state legislative guide. It doesn't track all legislation, but it gives you a good idea of what legislation to look out for and also what are bird-friendly bills. So I would say that's a really great first resource to take a look at. If you're looking at more tracking your local legislation, I would really encourage you to go to the websites of your local governing bodies. That's where you're going to find those primary resources. Besides that, I would really recommend looking at what local organizations are tracking policies. Some of those might compile, environmental bills, for example, that are of interest. So those are my recommendations for best resources.
Thanks, Annie. And back to you, Steve. Folks would love to know what's the most important or gets a response message for their legislators when they're talking about their support for, say, getting the Farm Bill passed. Have you found anything that really works when people call and say this exact line to their legislator? Any tips for really making a memorable phone call or letter?
Well, sure. Thank yous, offering, some praise if they assuming that they've done something good to offer them praise for is always a good way to start a conversation. The next way is to try to bring it home. What is the benefit to your city or state if this action is taken, and where's the upside of it? This can get right into the fact that you love birds and you want to see birds, but there's also huge benefits to birds. There's economics behind bird watching. There's ecological benefits to birds, and so I think that focusing on some of those positives is a good approach.
Thanks, Steve. And Robert, given that you mentioned your flying experience and folks are really impressed that you were at Capitol Hill too, have you found anything that's really made a difference in when you're talking to the state legislators?
Yeah, absolutely. We're all biologists or played one on TV at least at one point in my life, but I think the important thing is those folks that live on the land and own the land, that live in those districts of those legislators that make those decisions. Those are the folks that are listened to. So oftentimes we may have a lot of information, but what some of the joint ventures and some partners do is they take to the Hill those folks that have participated in these programs on the ground and that believe in them and that benefited from them, and take them to the Hill. And they're the ones that really tell the story, right? They're the ones that vote and live in those communities that can really impress upon those legislators the benefits that those policies and programs have had on the ground.
Thanks, Robert. And obviously, there are so many other subtopics that we just don't have time for right now, but are really crucial and ABC is working on, such as energy and pesticides and more. So Annie, I'd love if you could just give a nod to those and tell folks how they can learn more or follow along.
Yeah, definitely. ABC has a really great threats and advocacy team that works on a variety of issues from collisions to invasive species to pesticides to seabirds. The list really goes on. So really the best resource is ABC, checking out our website, subscribing to news updates that we put out is really helpful because we do try our best to encapsulate the important issues for you and really connect you to those issues. And rest assured, it is my job, it is Steve's job, so many people on the advocacy and threats team's job to track these issues and to make sure you know about them.
Thank you, Annie. And again, there's so much more that we could say, but for now, I'd love to have all of the presenters give us just one more thing that they hope that everyone at home will take away from this webinar and share with a friend. So we'll go in order of the presenters, and Annie, you'll kick things off.
Yeah, so I know a lot of people in this new year are kind of uncertain about what will happen. I can definitely relate to that sentiment. what I would say is, regardless of what happens, having a voice is important. If your voice is not there, no one's voice is there. So just kind of keep speaking up and supporting bird conservation, really.
Thanks so much, Annie and Robert.
Right. I think the word I'd go on would be collaboration. And so in my short stint here with ABC, 3 years and 6 months, those most impactful programs are where folks get involved in a collaboration. And so when you become a part of a group that has a louder, more magnified voice and has real power to affect change.
Thanks, Robert and Steve.
Well, it all has huge cumulative effect. To use one of our policy terms, it can really build on itself when everybody engages. Thinking back to the Hawaii effort, when we saw the first 2.5 million, who would have guessed that, 15 years later, that almost $100 million would have gone into these projects. So you can really build momentum. You can build a force. So I encourage you all to join with us. We appreciate your time and support, and definitely we'll do everything we can to foster some effective action here.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you again to our presenters. And thank you again to our audience for joining us. All registrants will be receiving a link to the recording of this via email in just a few days. And we appreciate your support. The efforts you've heard here today are only possible thanks to members and donors like you who care about birds and believe in American Bird Conservancy's mission to conserve them. Will you join us and take bold action for birds in 2025? Monthly donors are vital to ABC and bird conservation, providing consistent and reliable support that makes critical conservation projects possible and ensures that we can respond to unexpected challenges and new opportunities swiftly. It's also an easy way to take action once and make a difference for birds all year long. Here's something that I'm so excited about to even get myself, our brand new Bold for Birds t-shirt, and all new monthly donors of just $10 or more will get one. This is the first time that we're offering this t-shirt, and at the moment, becoming a monthly donor is the only way that you will get it. Plus, all monthly donors of $5 or more get all the benefits of ABC membership, including our magazine, certain discounts, event invitations, and more. So don't forget that thanks to a generous ABC supporter, that your first 12 monthly gifts will count toward a one-to-one match, which could mean up to $20,000 for bird conservation. And you can make a gift now by visiting abcbirds.org/give or scanning the code on your screen with your phone. Thank you so much again for your support and caring about birds. Good birding!